Right, so in this video I'm going to talk about the recent Logan Paul versus Floyd Mayweather boxing match, and I'm going to be sort of talking about it using that as a little case study for some interesting discussion, I think. Yeah, because I think in one of my other videos I talked about how strength training can benefit certain athletes, and I talked about mixed martial arts and other combat sports. And I think what I said in that basically was that there's this myth that, like, muscle doesn't win fights, it's all about technique, and gaining muscle is going to make you slower, and it's not necessary and all this stuff. And I thought it was interesting because this fight that just happened was actually, like, just forget about the whole, like, Floyd Mayweather, Logan Paul, just forget about that for a second. You just think about it as, because what it really is it's a small person who has phenomenal technique, I guess, a small person with really good skill, and then a person with a lot less skill that's a lot bigger though, a lot bigger, stronger, probably more powerful. So if you look at it from that perspective, it makes quite an interesting little discussion. So I thought I'd talk about that in this video. So as we know, or if you don't know, Floyd Mayweather is probably, arguably, one of the greatest boxers of all time. He's extremely skilled in the ring. He's faced many hard opponents, and he retired with a boxing professional record of 50 wins to 0 losses. So extremely impressive. However, through his whole career, I think he was mainly weighed in. I don't know what his fighting weight was, but weighed in around the 140, 150 range, pounds, that is. And then Logan Paul has been boxing for 3 years, maybe 2-3 years, maybe 4, but he's he's a good athlete. He's quite a good athlete. He's big. He's probably weighs around 200 pounds in his normal weight, but I think he weighed in for this fight at about 180 something. So if we look at other martial arts like jiu-jitsu, the conversation would be totally different, because in jiu-jitsu does allow a smaller opponent with a lot better technique to be a bigger person, and we've seen this a lot actually. If you go look back at the first UFCs ever, that's pretty much what that was, because there was no weight classes. Obviously now that never happens. All fights are all weight class because you have athletic commissions and things like this. Yeah, so it's very unusual to see a fight where the people fighting have a difference in weight of more than 10 kilos, right? Unless it's like a super heavyweight thing where one of them weighs, well, they both weigh heaps, but maybe one weighs more. But that doesn't really matter, because that's like as a proportion of their own weight. It's not as big of a deal. But to see someone that weighs around what Floyd weighs, around 70 kilos, and then Logan around like 90 when he's like normally, right? And he's taller, so he's a lot taller. It's quite unusual. But boxing is very different, because the whole point of jiu-jitsu, the underlying fundamental premise of jiu-jitsu and purpose of it is to take people to the ground, because that once you take your opponent to the ground, you're nullifying any sort of use of explosive power. So if you're standing up, someone can throw a really hard punch, kick, all these things if you're standing up, but if you're on the ground, that nullifies that. So that's why it's commonly taught and practiced as like a self-defense thing. So that's how it originated. It originated as a means for smaller people to be able to beat or protect themselves against larger individuals, and they do that by going to the floor, because that's where you nullify that explosiveness. However, with boxing, obviously boxing or kickboxing or any striking sport is going to obviously heavily encourage or heavily incentivize, heavily reward those who have that explosive power and can hit hard. Obviously, weight classes do exist for a reason, because people who are bigger hit harder. There's a reason why we have heavyweight, lightweight, middleweight, welterweight. There's a reason why there's different weight classes, because two people that are the same skill, if one weighs 100 kilos and one weighs 70 kilos, it's and the guy that weighs 100 kilos is also, and it's not just about the weight as well, it's also the size. Obviously, if you're bigger, like if you physically take up more space, you're going to weigh way more as well. So that exists, for a reason. There's a reason why striking sports have weight classes. Even jiu-jitsu has weight classes, but that's because as a sport, that's different. And I think a lot of people were really trying to argue that it doesn't matter at all that Logan is bigger, probably stronger, maybe more powerful, has a bigger reach, because they were saying like, look, it doesn't matter. Floyd is that good. He just has that much experience. He's that skilled that it doesn't matter. Logan can't. Doesn't matter how big he is. And I sort of, when I saw the fight, if you've watched the fight, basically what happened was like it was an 8-round exhibition fight, so there was no winner or loser or anything. If it went the distance, which it did. And basically what happened was Logan didn't really land one clean strike. He landed a couple clean strikes, and Floyd was basically the one actually putting the pressure on because he has better conditioning. He was putting the pressure, and he landed a few good shots. Logan's face was a bit beat up after it, but yeah, he didn't get finished. He didn't even get knocked down once, I don't think. But Floyd was fine after Logan was a bit beat up. Like if you were to judge it, it would definitely be going to Floyd without a doubt. But people were saying, oh wow, it's really impressive, really amazing that Logan actually made it through the 8 rounds. But honestly, if I'm going to be completely honest, I'm actually not surprised at the result, because as someone who's knows about both combat sports and about sports science, I'm not surprised that someone of Logan's size could actually hang in there with someone like Floyd, because I do think that the effect of the huge weight differential is actually understated. So I think that there is weight classes for a reason. Now obviously Floyd Mayweather is one of the best boxers of all time ever, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he would have been a better opponent than any other boxer. Just because someone's the greatest boxer of all time doesn't mean they're going to be the best opponent for someone like Logan. If the current cruiserweight champion, so the cruiserweight is probably about around the weight that Logan was, right? If the current cruiserweight champion was in the position of Floyd and they did the fight, Logan would have gotten destroyed, would have gotten completely ruined. But obviously he's not going to do that, because there's not going to be as much money. The cruiserweight champion right now, that's not going to draw as much attention as Floyd was, so that's why they did it. But I think that's just an important thing to mention, is that if you have someone that's the size of Logan and can box, so it's like an Anthony Joshua. In fact, I think Anthony Joshua is a bit bigger than Logan is again, but still, it would be like a disaster. And another example, I think a thing that was circulating around the internet, I think a few years ago, was the clip of the Mountain or Hafthor Bjornsson doing a little like playful sort of sparring little thing with Conor McGregor. And at the time, I think Conor McGregor was the lightweight champion in the UFC. I'm not exactly sure of the timeline, but you can see the video, like Conor's there jumping around, sort of throwing some little strikes here and there. And then there's just a moment, I think, where Thor just like grabs him and just like holds onto him, and he's like holding his head like this. And it's like, oh, and then he kind of just like lets go and whatever. But like, as much as people who are fans of MMA don't want to admit it, Thor's a scary dude. It doesn't matter how much mixed martial arts or how much jiu-jitsu you know. If you're the size of Conor, who's like 70 kilos at the time, versus Thor, who at the time was probably upwards of 200 kilos, it doesn't matter how much MMA or the lack of MMA that Thor knows. Like, you cannot underestimate the ability of someone who's that huge. So you see him there, he like grabs him, and you're like, oh, like if he really want, maybe he couldn't do anything, like because he doesn't like understand how combat sports, he doesn't understand how, say, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, kickboxing works. But if that was a fight, like an actual MMA match, and he just runs up to him and grabs him, and just like puts him on the ground, just sits on him, like he would have won that fight in like a judge's eyes if he could have just like controlled him, which he would have. And it's not easy, People that like having more weight gives you a massive advantage. I said before with jiu-jitsu, it's all about the smaller person, being able to beat the bigger person. That's true, but people can get a bit confused sometimes, I think, because If you're small, if you have two people that are equal ability, and then one of them's small, I'll give the same example. One of them's like 70 kilos, one of them's 100. The guy that's 100 is going to have a massive advantage if they have the same skill in jiu-jitsu or something like this. Even if the guy that's 100 kilos is maybe slightly less skilled. Like if he's really strong, if he's like a strong, like athletic 100 kilos versus like a sort of strong 70 kilos, like 100 kilo guy's going to have a huge advantage. So yeah, don't be fooled by this. Don't be fooled by this misconception about that. Oh yeah, it doesn't matter. Muscles don't win fights. It doesn't matter how big you are, whatever strength. It's all about the technique, it's all about tech. No, it's muscles. Yeah, sure, muscles don't win fights. Yeah, okay, sure. I guess it's not. That's not an incorrect statement. But to say that muscle has nothing to do with it, because that's often the sort of intention that people have when they're saying that. When they say muscles don't win fights, that's sort of the impression that I get. To say that it has nothing to do with it is absolutely false. So, if you're a proponent of muscles don't win fights, go up to Anthony Joshua, WBO heavyweight champion, and tell him that, oh, you're too big, you have too much muscle, you're muscle bound, you'd be better off losing some muscle if you want to get better at boxing. Yeah, muscles don't win fights. Obviously, no one's going to say that because he's an amazing athlete and he's an extremely good boxer. Do I think that his athleticism and his overall like muscular development has helped him? Absolutely. Do I think that if the average person, the average like athletic individual who's into combat sports would benefit from gaining muscle and trying to improve their athleticism? Absolutely. So I think those are sort of the main takeaways, I think, from the Paul Mayweather fight. Yeah, so I think if you look at it just from that perspective of like, you know, the David versus Goliath thing, or the small guy with good technique, big guy with bad technique. If you look at it from that perspective, I think there's some really interesting things we can get from this, and all the way that people understand people who are big and athletic and then smaller in skill. I think there's this sort of weird understanding that people have. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe, share it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.